Welcome to Ice Cream.
Hello. Oh, yeah. Hello.
Oh.
This is Ice Cream, You Scream, your weekly scoop of the most chilling histories, mysteries, and true crime. My name's Kathryn.
I'm Gina.
Each month we choose a new flavor of the month, and that's for both topic and ice cream. And we tell you stories that may or may not be true while we have dessert. This month's flavor is strawberry ice cream. And we're going to be talking about vampires. So if you've joined us previously, you know that we're a couple episodes in, and we've got a couple more episodes for you. Grab a spoon. Let's dig in.
Cute.
Oh my
Loved
God,
that.
Oh, grab a spoon. Let's dig in. Okay.
I'm going to eat my disgusting ice cream.
So, brought an ice pack today, and it's...
To keep it from melting?
Yeah, it's doing
That's
okay.
genius.
Thank you.
I didn't think about doing it. I always just let
I was
mine...
going to say, for a second I thought it was your idea, but I don't think that one... I think that one was my idea.
No, my ideas aren't that good. Ugh.
Gina's not a fan of her ice cream this month.
I'm not.
If only there was something we could do about it.
If only there was a way to make food items at home and not buy them for one single pound at the local shop.
Speaking of wishes, we'd love for you guys to like and subscribe. We're doing our best.
Subscribe, cowards.
Subscribe to our channel. But really, one of the best things that will help us out as far as performance and being able to bring more episodes to you is if you rate, review, like, and subscribe. So go ahead and do that. If you have any positive feedback, we'd love to hear it / see it in the reviews. If you have negative feedback, just message us privately. Oh, my lactate!
Oh my God. Kathryn almost died.
Oh my gosh. I don't even know what's happening right now.
All right.
So, now do you have a story for us?
Yeah, I think I could whip up one. All right. Oh, I'm in a funny mood, and I have to talk about something serious.
Okay, it's funny because we were totally like, when we were in our meeting before, it was like this, item, agenda, blah, 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 move on, blah, blah, blah. And then we get in here and it's like...
I just want to giggle and frolic in a field and make a flower cry. Yeah, I know. So what I'm going to talk about is something that did actually happen, but it is a story that became so famous so quickly and has been told so many times that it does have kind of a folkloric element to it, which I think is a really interesting kind of... We'll get there when we get there. But basically, this is one of the most famous vampire stories in American history, but it is far from the only one of its kind. This isn't a unique story. It's one version of events that has played out many times. More on that later. This is kind of a hallmark of one of the biggest vampire cliches ever, which is that humans are the real monsters, you know? Monsters aren't always the ones with the fangs. Sometimes they're the ones with the torches, pickaxes, whatever.
Yeah.
Pitchforks.
I mean, yeah. I mean,
those
maybe.
miners that really hate vampires.
Yeah. Usually.
Yeah, those dwarves from Snow White really didn't like them. I can't fucking do it.
I'm laughing because that's exactly what I was imagining in my head when you said pickaxe. I was imagining Bashful, the Bashful one.
Oh my God. You know that thing that Bashful does when he's being bashful, where he like kind of...
When he like curls up. Yeah.
I try to do that all the time, and Tom never knows what I'm trying to do.
I know what like you do it on here sometimes. You do it when people compliment you. Yeah.
Me?
Like that. Yeah.
I compliment.
You do it all the time.
Ooh. Okay. Anyway.
I will say though, one real thing that I have to say is that's a theme / thread that I think we will probably be talking a lot about forever, for as long as we have this podcast. I know that that's something that I have thought of, and even just the episodes that I've done thus far, people are so afraid of monsters all the time. you don't even want to call it like a trope because it is just the way it is. It's in everything, you know?
Yeah. And it's the scariest when you can trace the path that led them to committing monstrous acts, which this is very much one of those stories where you understand exactly what got them to that point. Anyway, okay, so I'll tell you the story.
Cool.
So this is about Mercy Brown, the last vampire of New England. Dun dun dun. So before we get into the actual kind of meat and potatoes here, we have to talk about the New England vampire panic first, because it sets the scene for everything we're about to walk into. So, as you know, because we've talked about the New England vampire panic before, we could do, we could do an entire flavor, like an entire month on the New England vampire panic if we wanted to. There is so much that goes into this, happens in it, comes out of it. It's absolutely massive in its implications. But the spark notes are basically between the 18th and 20th centuries, New England had a very real, very serious tuberculosis problem. For context, so our story is going to start popping off in the 1800s. And by that point, tuberculosis was responsible for almost a quarter of all of the deaths in New England. And a lot of the communities that were impacted by this, because New England was a heavily agricultural area, and in areas like that, people tend to know each other. Like farmers tend to stick together, particularly back then, you know? And so it wasn't just massive amounts of death, it was massive amounts of people that you knew dying. Everyone was directly impacted, or impacted in such a way like there was no getting away from it. It was ever present, it was everywhere. And another thing that's important to keep in mind about this is tuberculosis was not very well understood back then at all. Scientists were expanding their knowledge, they were studying it, they had theories and things like that, but they weren't close to preventing it, curing it. There wasn't a widely accepted understanding of what was happening and why. And even though the scientists of the time were working on it, that the information they had was not necessarily disseminated to agricultural communities in 1800s New England. Like that information wasn't omnipresent or whatever. Also, people called it consumption back then, not tuberculosis. That's a relatively new way of terming it. And the reason they called it consumption is because it seemed like it consumed its victims, literally consumed them. You would hear rattling coughs, their skin would become super pale. You could see them getting thinner, like their bodies were wasting away. Like it literally looked like they were being consumed by a disease, which, you know, consumption. I have a quote actually from a Connecticut archaeologist named Nicholas Bellatoni, who said, "Consumptives lost weight, coughed up blood, and their skin turned ashen, and sometimes they died a slow death, almost as if something was sucking the life out of them." Sounds a little vampiric, no?
It sure does.
Consumption, tuberculosis, whatever we want to call it, it is super, super infectious. And, you know, back then, like we were talking about in this agricultural community, a lot of times you would have really big families and they would all live in the same house together. And so if one of them got TB, they would start falling like dominoes. And it was not unheard of to have entire families wiped out by the same disease. Unfortunate, but it happened a lot.
Was it, maybe you already said this, I don't remember, but how does it spread? Is it an airborne?
Yes. So it is, from what I read, it's in your, it's like a bodily fluid thing. So if I had TB and I coughed in your face, that's me passing it to you. And actually, one thing that's interesting is that you can contract consumption tuberculosis from a dead body. Yeah. So like if somebody dies,
that I did not know.
If a TB victim dies and then you're performing an autopsy, let's say you pop open one of their lungs, the infected air is still in there and it can get out into the air you breathe, and then you can catch it from them.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, which is part of the reason why it was such a, I mean, it was a horrible disease, but it was passed so easily and so many people died because you can't not breathe, you know?
Yeah, well, and I'm sure that contributed a lot to like the mystery aspect of it. Like if you don't obviously know what we know now, what I just found out 2 seconds ago, then if someone passes away and someone contracts it, that can be confusing if you don't have like the basic knowledge of how. Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm like starting to see where this is going.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So to recap, we have a super, super deadly, very widespread disease, and we have extremely limited knowledge about where it comes from or how to cure it, which those two things kind of recipe for a disaster. Like desperation plus uncertainty almost always equals scapegoat, and that's it. They had a scapegoat here. And it was, no surprise, vampires. But it's worth noting that these are not vampires as we knew of them today. In fact, a lot of people from New England at this time didn't even call them vampires. That's kind of more of an outsider thing, that the rest of the world has attributed the word vampire to stories like this. But if you were in those communities at that time, there either wasn't a word for it or the word was not vampires. I wasn't able to find what terminology they used, but I feel like it was probably very location based too. Like different places probably had different ways of referring to it.
Super interesting because, I mean, we've said that every episode thus far. This one already sounds the most like the way I think we understand it. So it's interesting that it still wasn't referred to as that directly when the idea was already there. We were just missing the actual physical word. you know?
And one of the interesting parts about this is in some of the old newspapers that I was reading, other areas of the states would kind of poke fun at New England for believing in vampires. And so there was probably there was probably an element to it as well of, I believe in this thing, but if I say vampire, everyone's going to think I'm crazy or something like that,
that makes sense to me. Yeah, that kind of, because I kind of, when you said that, there's sort of a question mark. Because to me, I'm like, sitting here in 2024, like we have all these stories and we call all of these people vampires and we're saying they were. We have evidence to suggest that people genuinely thought they were, but all of these stories are also like, oh, but they didn't say it. It's like, well, then how did we get here? Like, how did she become the one that everyone was like, yeah, that's a vampire, but not? So that makes sense to me that, as an outsider, especially since we are talking about a panic within a small community, if you're not in that panic, if you're not experiencing the loss that the people within it are experiencing, it's easy to be like, oh, wow, they're so dumb. They think blah, blah, blah. But if it were to happen to you, like,
you look for any kind of explanation. Right. It's interesting because so much of this is based on where you were. So throughout New England, there had been this superstition that we think came over from Europe at some point, that one, the dead could come back as vampires or some kind of being that sucks the life force away from another person. And then two, the other kind of half of this is that vampires didn't need to leave the grave in order to take their victims. So they weren't like on both feet running around biting people's necks. They were from a distance, from afar, killing people from the grave within their, under their little tombstone and stuff. But like
I didn't know that.
Yeah, and the symptoms of how you knew whether or not a dead body had turned into a vampire differ. That's what differs from place to place. So some areas it was if there's still blood in the heart. Some areas it was if they had appeared to have moved in the grave. There were a ton of different random things that you could look for, kind of like a witch hunt, how it used to be. Oh, if I prick you and you don't bleed, then, or whatever it was, those ridiculous things.
You have a birthmark or something.
Yeah.
If I drown you, but you don't drown, we're gonna kill you.
God, yeah.
That's the worst one. That's my least favorite one.
Me too. When we eventually do a flavor on witches or witch trials, it's gonna be a month of rage because my God, I'm just gonna be so mad the entire time. Also, there was a really crucial piece of this superstition is that, remember what I was saying earlier about entire families getting wiped out by this? So there was a belief that if somebody died and came back as a vampire, the easiest people for them to kill or consume the life force of, or however you want to label it, easiest people for them to do that to was their family members because they had a direct connection to them. So a lot of times if you had an entire family wiped out, they would attribute the blame or try to put the blame on one specific family member who was killing the rest from beyond the other side, which is sad.
That makes me uncomfortable. I hate that.
Yeah.
That's heartbreaking.
Yeah. And like I said, like
imagine?
not everyone believed in this. There were a lot of skeptics about it, but enough people did believe in this kind of thing, particularly in rural areas where things like superstition tend to take root in a really deep way. Enough people believed that it caused a full-fledged panic, which we now know as the New England vampire panic. So with all of that context, that horrible context in mind, we're going to zoom in a little bit to Exeter, Rhode Island in the 19th century. So Exeter was and is still a really small, isolated town. And it's a place that, I mean, was and is used to being very self-sufficient. There's not a whole ton of people that live there. Everyone kind of chips in to help each other. It's basically a big like farming community, that kind of thing. It's also, just a fun fact, apparently it has some of the most fertile soil in New England.
What the fuck?
Yeah, so that's fun. That's cool.
How do you know that? Like, who said that? Like, how do you learn? Like, is that like who decides that?
I went on fertilesoil.com. And
no, you didn't. Wait,
no,
did you? Because I kind of believe you.
I'm scared. I don't know what fertilesoil.com.
I was literally just gonna go into my browser and I stopped because I was like,
don't do it.
I can't. I need to like not get blocked.
Yeah,
right
you'll
now.
see some weird shit.
I need the internet right now. Okay, I really believed you there for a second. I was like, no way.
Yeah, it's like the dirt Wikipedia. No, it was just something that I read on like one of the articles that people have written about this. So I haven't verified it. I don't have the soil samples, but allegedly.
That's one of those things that I'm going to try not to make this into a tangent, but there are so many things that are so niche that you don't think there's an expert on them, but there is. And the most fertile soil in Rhode Island is one of those things that, like, I believe there's an expert on that.
Like, I would love to meet them.
If you're listening to I would never think.
And you have a PhD in soil.
Rhode Island soil specifically.
Rhode Island specific soil.
New England fertile soil. Please email us at icecreamyouscreampod@gmail.com. Is that what it is?
Yes. Okay. Subject line, dirt for you. Love you long time.
Anyway, so we're fertile in Rhode Island.
Super duper fertile. Yeah, so I bring that up because, again, like it's a farming community, which means you get big families all living in the same house, which will come back into play. But also, because it's a farming community, the degree of isolation here, again, superstition runs really, really deep. So it's not surprising that there were people, part of this community, that did believe this whole vampire thing was going on. And all of this, the panic, the superstitions in Exeter, all of the fertile soil, it's exacerbated by what at the time was this really big push to move away and move out west, kind of a claim your fortune type of thing. Yeah. So by the time our story kind of pops off in the 1890s, 500 residents to around 960 in less than a century, like over the course of 70 years. So it dropped significantly, which means the people who were left in Exeter, I mean, one, people were dying all around them, which sucks. And then two, they were watching a lot of people who were still there choose to leave. And so they're left in what I imagine was this kind of bleak, like you're watching your home almost waste away a little bit, which I don't know, just the scene of that is just, there's something, you can feel something brewing already. From what I have read about this, it seems like all of these factors kind of compounding on top of each other, it seems like it kind of made the people who were left cling to the way things had always been done, just for some semblance of familiarity and feeling like they were all still going to be okay. So there was a lot of focus on kind of the old ways of doing things and old remedies, which anyway, on that note, I'm going to take us to the Brown family. So first, let's talk about the family members. We have George, the father. He's married to Mary Eliza. Their oldest daughter is named Mary Olive. They have
I love
Olive.
that name.
Me too. I think it's so
Mary,
cute.
I love that that's such a like 19th century?
Yes,
Is
yeah.
it the 18th? Okay. I love that it's like Mary something, Mary something, Mary something, Mary
I know.
something.
There's a lot of Marys,
like,
yeah.
How virginal. No, I love that. Anyway, sorry, continue.
So Mary Olive, she's the oldest. They have one son. His name is Edwin. And then the third child we're going to focus on is Mercy. She's their middle child. They had a few other kids as well. But anyway, okay. So Mercy's full name was Mercy Lena Brown. And people actually, like, history knows her as Mercy, but people just called her Lena. Like, her family called her Lena. Her obituary refers to her as Lena. It seems like that was her preferred name. So I don't know why somehow that has not translated throughout history.
I
but
never knew that.
Yeah, so if it's not going to cause too much confusion, I'm just going to call her Lena because that seems like what she wanted people to do, and she goes through enough. So I think we can say her preferred name.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lena.
Okay. One thing that's not talked about a whole lot in kind of the modern version of the story is the fact that there were 4 other kids as well. So there were 7 kids total. The other 4 kids were Annie, Hattie, Jenny, and Myra. So just to avoid having too many names, I'm just going to focus on the 3 main kids and the parents. So when Lena was around 11 or 12 years old, unfortunately, her mother, Mary Eliza, did die from tuberculosis. It was December 1883. She was the first of the family to contract and die from TB, but she would not be the last, sadly. 7 months after Mary Eliza died, Mary Olive, who is Lena's oldest sister, died as well in June 1884. Yeah, she was just 20 years old. And one thing that was interesting about reading about Mary Olive's death is the local newspaper, when she died, did a write-up on her funeral. It wasn't clear if it was just a write-up on the funeral or if it was an obituary, but it was like the nicest, just such a wonderful way to remember her. It was way longer than it needed to be, which I thought was very thoughtful. And it made a point to emphasize how well attended the funeral was. And in true, like, 1880s fashion, it called her, and I quote, a very worthy young lady.
Oh my, okay.
Very worthy.
Wow.
But it's clear that she was a beloved member of this community.
Yeah.
People really, really loved her. So that's one thing that was true about her death. I'm going to now tell you something that may or may not be true. It is speculation. There are reports that before Mary Olive died, she complained of having these dreams, these really horrible dreams, where there was a crushing weight on her that was like crushing the life out of her while she slept, apparently.
Okay.
Remember that because it'll come back. Yeah. So, cut back to the family. They are reeling from the loss of not just their mom and their wife, but also the eldest child. And I know because you and I are younger siblings, we definitely get this. If you have an older sibling, they're on par with your parents as like superhero quality. Nothing can happen to them when you're 11 or 12, like Lena is.
Yeah.
Like
especially
it shakes you if something happens.
Especially that age gap, because what would she have been, 8 when Lena was born?
So Mary Olive was born in 1864. Lena was burn.
She was burnt.
Fuck. It's happening.
That should not have been as funny as it was. I'm leaving this in. I am not editing this out.
Lena was born in 1872, so that's like an 8-year gap.
Okay, yeah, so she was 8. That's like a whole human. Like, she could help change diapers,
Yeah, it is like a third parent. Yeah. So
that's sad.
yeah, the family is just reeling from this. I mean, they kept working the farm. I mean, you do what you can. You try and get through it. And things seemed to kind of return to normal, or as normal as they can be after you suffer those kinds of losses in that quick of succession. So about 5 or 6 years passed, and sadly, their kind of peace came to an absolutely grinding halt when Edwin, the only son, started showing symptoms of the same disease.
No, not the boy.
Yes.
That's like the worst thing back then.
The little prince. I know,
Not
yeah.
the boy.
He gets sick, right? He's about 23 when this happens. He apparently had dreams that were very similar to the ones Mary Olive had. He started dreaming about suffocating, kind of similar how she dreamed about that she was getting crushed. He apparently had dreams where he was drowning in something.
Ew, I hate that.
So just
something.
Didn't say what it was. So I don't know. Maple syrup? Who knows?
Oh,
So
that's horrible.
Peanut butter, warm peanut butter.
Stop! That's so terrible.
Yeah, it is.
Oh my god, that's so gross.
So, in response to him like starting to show symptoms, his doctor, his friends, his family all kind of had the same reaction, which was you need to get out of Exeter for a while. You need to go somewhere with cleaner air. Go to Colorado. Which, like, at the time, so he went to basically a health spa, which was a really common practice back then. They would, if you came down with TB, they would relocate you to somewhere with like cleaner air. Like Mammoth Caves is a good example of somewhere that they used to put TB victims. Bournemouth, where I live, weirdly, was also like a big health resort place for a long time. Yeah. And also, something else interesting that I found, alongside like sending people away for cleaner air, other common remedies for consumption victims at this time was, and these are not things Edwin did, they're just things I thought were interesting. Drinking the milk of a pregnant woman was apparently supposed to help, and also sleeping with a piece of seaweed under your pillow. Yeah.
What the fuck?
Yeah, just thought it was interesting.
Dude, I love an old school remedy.
Me too. It reminded me of the Bathory episode with the skull and the blood.
Yeah,
because
that's
just
exactly
like,
what I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Because like, what? This is where my head always goes because it freaks me out. Like, what are we doing now that like 100 years from now they're going to be like, look at what these idiots in 2024 were doing?
I know.
Because there's got to be so much.
So he does wind up going. He goes to Colorado. He and his wife went there in 1890. And he wound up spending around 2 years there. And the reports about what happened while he was in Colorado, it kind of depends on who you ask. Some people say that he started to feel better. Some say his symptoms got worse. The most popular story is that he did feel better while he was there. So that's the one I'm going to be kind of going with here. But just to say, we don't know for sure. There are conflicting accounts of what actually happened. Regardless, he stayed. But a few years after he got there, his little sister Lena started to show symptoms of TB. There were no reports of weird dreams this time, but I think part of that might, if the dream thing is true, I think part of it is that Lena, her tuberculosis it's what they called galloping consumption or TB, which is basically when you're asymptomatic for a really long time and then it all happens over the course of like weeks or months. It's very, very quickly.
Yeah. I've never heard of that. I only know that it's like a terrible, slow decline and people are miserable forever and then they eventually waste away.
For the most part, it is. My understanding is that galloping variety is not as common, but apparently it can happen because it happened to her. So at this point, poor George is watching his entire family just fade away one by one. It's absolutely heartbreaking. It's so fucking sad. And unfortunately, Lena did wind up dying a few months later. She passed away in January of 1892 when she was just 19 years old.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's young.
Yeah. Just a side note, compared to what the paper wrote about Mary Olive, Lena's obituary was not as nice. It wasn't mean by any stretch of the imagination. It just was very, very short, and it gave no flavor of like anything at all. So I can read the entire thing to you right now, and it will take me no time at all. So it said, Miss Lena Brown of Exeter, who had been suffering from consumption, died Sunday morning. That's it. It's the entire thing. It's the entire thing. Now, to be honest, I'm not sure, because like I said earlier, I'm not sure if what they wrote about Mary Olive was a write-up on the funeral or an obituary. This was Lena's obituary. So it could be that there was something else out there that I just couldn't find. But like comparing the two, one right after the other, I was like, what the fuck?
That's got like, why can't you be more like your older sister energy?
It does. It really does.
Hate to say it, but it does.
It does. It does. So Edwin, obviously, his little sister died, so he's going to come back home. He returns from Colorado, and it seems like almost immediately his symptoms start to get worse again.
Oh, interesting.
There are reports that he would yell out in his sleep, and he would say things like, "She was here and she wants me to come with her."
What?
Yeah, scary shit. Spooky, scary shit. So the community of Exeter, obviously, they know all of this is going on. They're a tight-knit community. So they're up to date. They know that Lena's dead. They know Edwin is getting sick again. And from their perspective, they're watching the Brown family like dominoes, just one by one by one. They're all either coming down with TB or dying from it. So they're already in kind of a panic, right? I mean, in their eyes, having so many of the same family die or come down with this, it just couldn't be a coincidence. And this is where the superstition and the clinging to the old ways kind of starts to come into play. So basically, it was a tragedy so great that they just had to find an explanation for it. And the explanation was that one of the Browns was a vampire, and they were killing their family members from beyond the grave. There's a book that interviews one of Lena's descendants. We think it was like a great nephew kind of situation. It's called Food for the Dead. It's very, very good. I highly recommend it. And one thing that they were talking about is that back then, this was not a time where people really went to see doctors for things. It was a time of at-home remedies, picking yourself up by your bootstraps. You'd go to the doctor if you had to, but it was not the first response. It wasn't the first place you would go to look for answers in a situation like this. Another kind of interesting piece of this that comes from one of Lena's descendants, his name is Everett, by the way. The way that his family tells the story is that the Browns in Exeter weren't the only branches of that family getting sick when this happened. Apparently, according to him, there was a branch of the Brown family in Ohio, and they had a TB problem in that branch of the family at the same time. So in Exeter, it wasn't just 3 people have died from this in the same family and a 4th has become ill. It was, the numbers were potentially much higher than that. So you kind of get it. Like, you understand why they resorted to it's got to be a vampire, you know?
I totally get it, because as I sit here right now, I'm like, oh my God, that's suspicious. And it's like,
right?
It's not. TB was a big problem, like across the entire world.
So they started putting pressure on Papa George, to dig up the bodies of his wife and 2 daughters. To look to see if there were symptoms of one of them being a vampire. And George, understandably, super reluctant to do it. He really did not want to at first. The versions of this story that I have read never seemed like, yeah, fuck it, dig him up. Like, it seemed like it was carefully considered. Okay. They had to convince George that it would be the right call. There was an article written about it in the Providence Journal dated March 19th, 1892. I'm going to read you a little snippet of it because I think it tells you what was going on better than I can, I think.
Okay.
So it says, quote, "During the few weeks past, Mr. Brown has been besieged on all sides by a number of people who expressed implicit faith in the old theory that by some unexplained and unreasonable way, in some part of the deceased relative's body, live flesh and blood might be found, which is supposed to feed on the living who are feeble in health. So basically, what this is saying is people were bugging him because they wanted him to dig up the graves to see if there was still any blood in their organs, which was supposed to be a sign that they were still a vampire. Again,
Oh God.
clinging to the old ways, the ways that things had always been done out of panic. George, to his credit, he stayed strong as long as he could. But at the end of the day, he's watched his wife and 2 daughters die. He's watching his only son cling on by a thread. I think he would have been willing to do anything if he thought it might save one of his kids. So he did wind up consenting to exhuming them. In March 1892, so the same month that article was written, at Chestnut Hill Cemetery in Exeter, a group of locals, which did include a doctor, important to note the doctor was there, they exhumed the corpses of Mary Eliza and her daughters, 20-year-old Mary Olive and 19-year-old Lena. So we'll start with Mary Eliza and Mary Olive. Basically, that part's real quick. They unearthed them, dug up their graves, and they were basically just bones at that point. They had both been dead for around 10 years. Apparently, Mary Olive still had some hair, actually like a thick head of hair. Yeah. But there was no blood left to label them as vampires, basically. So that one was kind of open and shut relatively quickly.
Like business as usual. This is what they were hoping to find.
Yeah. Okay. So they move on to exhume Lena's body. But when they uncovered her, apparently the crowd was really terrified to discover that she was still very well preserved. And again, what happens next kind of depends on who you ask. So most stories say that, in shock, the crowd basically asks the doctor to test her body to see if it had any symptoms of being a vampire, any blood still in the organs. So the doctor opened her up, removed her heart, which was part of it, and found that it did still contain blood, which was supposed to be a surefire sign that she was a vampire. But Everett, again, one of Lena's descendants, the story passed down through his family, through generations, is that the first sign that something was wrong was when they exhumed Lena and saw that she had literally turned over in her grave.
Oh.
Somehow. Don't know if that's true, but it's the story that's told.
Like she was flipped?
Yeah. Like she had been laid to rest, and then when they unearthed her, she had flipped around. Somehow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Either way, from that point, then they removed the heart and they were like, yep, for sure, super duper vampire. So also worth noting, because they made a big point of it in Food for the Dead, Everett very much does not believe in vampires. Do not take anything that I'm saying as him believing in it, because he was very specific that he does not. This is just the story that was given to him.
Because you said that, you said, like, this is the family lore, like, the story that's passed down, but I did hear, like, he was saying that she did. So,
no,
yeah,
he's very good at staying impartial and being like, I don't know what I believe, but this is what they believed, kind of thing.
Interesting.
Now,
okay.
One thing I do have to fucking say is that when Lena died, so she died in the winter, right? And winter in New England, fucking brutal. So they weren't gonna dig up the frozen ground to put her in there. They put her in a vault, which was essentially, at that time of year, a refrigerator. And then they exhumed her, took her out of the vault, like 2 months later. So of course she wasn't gonna be fully decomposed by then. They had put her in a fridge and only left her there for 2 months. And apparently the doctor who was on the scene made a point to say, hey, what we're seeing here, the blood that's still in the heart, completely reasonable. Like we should be seeing that at this point. Yeah. So he tried to stop it from going any further by being reasonable, but the superstition and the panic and the terror was just so deep that there was okay, well, just in case, we're going to take the final step, which was they removed her heart and her liver. They put them on a rock near the grave and they burned them to ashes. And then once they were burned to ashes, they put those ashes in a glass of water, and then they gave it to Edwin to drink as a tonic, which was apparently supposed to be a cure for TB. And with that in mind, the townsfolk just kind of went home.
That like made my stomach feel sour.
Yeah, and allegedly that rock that they burned the organs on is still there. You can still see it today.
Oh.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like a tourist destination?
Unfortunately, yes. Which let's land on that for a second, because guys, don't fucking go there. They are sick of people going there. Poor Lena's grave has been straight up defaced so many times. It was stolen once. I think it was in 1996. Her tombstone was stolen. Luckily that they recovered it. But people will go there and like chip off parts of her tombstone, or the you know what I mean? And they'll take the little rocks home with them, which it's really horrible how it's her grave is still disrespected.
It's one thing to visit a place for the sake of history and paying respects. It's another thing to just waltz in and act like you own the place just because you think horror stories are cool and funny. For me personally, I really enjoy, I don't know, there's a name for it now, like horror tourism. I enjoy visiting graves and shit of people from stories like this.
But like,
or like
being
haunted
houses
about it. But I'm respectful about it. Like, I'm not going because I'm gross. I'm going because it's history. You know, these are things that happen. So the difference is like people that do things like that, to them it's a story. It's not people who lived lives and experienced tragedy.
Yeah. So when I said don't go there, you have my permission to go there, but be nice.
Be respectful.
Pay respect to this poor girl who was disrespected even in death. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's sad.
Yeah. So all of this happens. The townsfolk kind of go home. Unfortunately, that remedy did not work. Edwin's condition worsened, and just 2 months after all of this happened, he actually wound up dying too. You remember those other sisters that I mentioned, the 4 other sisters? 3 of them died of consumption as well within 7 years.
Oh, no. Wait, that's all of them but 1, right?
Yeah, so that left... so it left George, the dad, and his daughter Hattie as the only remaining survivors. Only remaining survivors of what was initially a 9-person family. There are only 2 of them left.
That's sad.
So fucking sad. So sad.
That is sad.
George actually, he never wound up contracting tuberculosis that we know of. And he wound up living until 1922. And I point that out because he lived through both the discovery of the bacteria that causes tuberculosis, and he also lived through the invention of the vaccine, which was first used on humans a year before he died in 1921. Which I bring up because it's
wild.
Yeah, it's kind of equal parts tragic and comforting to me. Like, on the one hand, watching there be a cure for something that you've lost so many family members to, I imagine has to hurt, because you know that if that had been there for your family, they could have lived. But on the other hand, he died knowing that no other father has to go through what he went through again. And so it's some sense of closure, I guess. I mean, as much as you can get in this kind of situation. But yeah.
I'm going to go down a rabbit hole. Do you ever see those videos that explain to you time and like, oh, we're closer to the dinosaurs than we were, or like whatever, you know what I mean? That's how I felt just now, because the year he died is the year that my grandmother was born, which is like, we kind of talked about it at the beginning, where it's like these stories are not as far away as you might think they are. That was over 100 years ago at this point, but my grandmother's parents would have read about this in the newspaper.
Yeah, almost definitely.
Like, that
it's
blows
funny
my
that
mind.
You bring that up, because I also wanted to contextualize how recent this is. So I did a little bit of math for the first time in my life.
Oh, wow. Holy shit. Okay.
Yeah. So that was new.
What the fuck? Okay.
So the crux of this story, when Lena dies, that takes place in 1892. Right? That's 27 years after the Civil War ended, and only 22 years before World War I started. So people had typewriters, they did have telephones, they had electric lights. The dishwasher was invented before this. for crying out loud. Like,
dude,
this,
hold on.
yeah.
You gotta pause because you had me at electricity. Electricity is one that, like, I know electricity existed back then, but at no point in any part of this story did I imagine them with electricity.
It's
That
like the
doesn't
pieces
compute
don't,
with me.
yeah.
Like, because that was when, around the turn of the century, I, like, can't, you know what blew my mind? Man, this is a rabbit hole. I'm so sorry.
What?
I felt that way the first time I ever saw Meet Me in St. Louis. Have you ever seen that movie?
No.
It's good to watch around, like, Christmas time. It takes place at the turn of the century, so it would have been after this. It takes place in 1903. And it always blows my mind because I'm like, they have this big, grand, beautiful house with electricity and a telephone in the dining room. That's like a whole part of the storyline. And it blows me away because my house was built the same year. And I imagine my house as like there were candles on the wall. And like, but like they probably had electricity. Like it probably was not like, I mean, I know they had electricity because we had to update the electric because it literally had not been updated in like 80 years. It was like actually a fire hazard. The guy who did our inspection was like, "You are not safe." I was like, "Okay, how much is this going to cost me?" But I don't know. Again, mine does not.
The mind boggles.
Compute.
It boggles.
Like
I
don't know.
totally get it. And that's part of the reason why I tried to do a little bit of math to just for my own sanity to try
it.
Yeah, just because I was also picturing it way longer ago than it actually was. And I also do have to say, I Googled Meet Me in St. Louis, and the dress that Judy got, the red one.
Yes. That's why you gotta watch that movie. You have to watch that movie because of the set design and the costume design is just stunning. Yeah.
Oh,
that's a classic.
Beautiful.
But also, wow, they had electricity. There's so many people know history so well that are sitting here like, wow, these broads are not smart. It just that blows my mind.
Yeah, and especially when we're talking about stories where people are hunting vampires.
Yes,
you think, oh my gosh, that must have been so long ago because we've known that vampires aren't real forever, la 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 la. But it was not that long ago that people were doing this.
Yes. Anything that's folklore related, the years can kind of screw me up. Anyway, back to the tragedy.
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, this story, Lena's story, it's just one of many, many, many similar cases in New England at the same time. One of the other really popular ones is, or not, I shouldn't say popular, but one of the ones that gets talked about simultaneously as like the Mercy Brown story is a girl who died in 1889, so a few years before Lena died, in Rhode Island. It was the same kind of area. Her name is Nellie Vaughn, and it was kind of a similar situation. And the reason why it's become well known these days is because one day in like 1960s or something like that, like it was pretty recent, there were a bunch of, I think it was like just like high schoolers, teenagers who were driving around kind of like what we were talking about earlier, looking for vampire graves, because I think a teacher at their high school had mentioned that there was a vampire buried nearby, and they found Nellie's gravestone, and the inscription on it is, "I am waiting and watching for you."
What?
Creepy, right? Yeah.
That's what it says? Okay. I don't know. That like gave me the heebie-jeebies.
Yeah. Yeah, and Nellie is an interesting... So Nellie, actually, she gets confused with Lena/Mercy a lot.
I've heard that name before, and I wonder if I am one of the people who has confused them.
Well,
I'm sure I probably have.
Because I mean, there's differing accounts about the Nellie story. What seems to be the truth is that she actually died of pneumonia, not tuberculosis, and she wasn't exhumed to look for vampiric symptoms. She was exhumed to be moved to a different cemetery, graveyard. Some people disagree with that, and that everyone has a different story because it's been told and retold so many times. But that's what seems to be the truest one. And yeah, but besides Nellie, I mean, this happened a lot. This was not the only case of it happening. Again, what made this so well known is that the media got a hold of it and just kind of went to town on it. I know that we have mentioned Dracula in every single vampire episode that we've done so
there
far.
was no way
You gotta.
in any realm of hell that we were not going to. Like,
Yeah.
that's the most culturally relevant vampire for us in the
Yeah.
Western world. So,
and there's a lot of people think that Stoker based his character of Lucy on Lena. And when you look at the detail, like you can kind of see it lining up. Both of them are 19. Both are described as kind of innocents in their story. I know Lena was not a story, she was real, but still, from a narrative perspective, they were both the innocents. Both of their mothers die, and then both of them fall sick and come back from the grave as a vampire. So there are parallels, you know, so you can kind of see it. But what makes this more believable is that there was a newspaper clipping that was found in Stoker's belongings, like after he died, about this story. So he definitely knew about it. He definitely read it. He consumed this media. And the thought is that it translated itself into what eventually became Dracula.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, you know, that's pretty.
Dracula came out in the same, within a decade of Lena dying. So it was a contemporary kind of, you know, and Stoker wasn't the only author to write about this. Thoreau actually mentioned the story in one of his journal entries, and then Lovecraft like directly refers to this in a novelette that he wrote in 1924. It's called The Shunned House. One of the characters in it, her name's Anna White, and she's supposed to be from Exeter, Rhode Island, where all this happens. Like in the story, Lovecraft describes Exeter as a seat of the most uncomfortable superstitions. As lately as 1892, an Exeter community exhumed a dead body and ceremoniously burnt its heart in order to prevent certain alleged visitations injurious to the public health and peace.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there you go. That's the whole story. Didn't need to spend a whole hour on this. Could have just read that.
But I'm so glad you did.
Yeah, but in a modern context, something that I also thought was really interesting is that Lore actually did their first ever episode.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's a really good episode.
Yeah, I remember that one. When I first saw Mercy Brown on our episode list, I was like, I know this name, but I don't know what this is. Like, I know things about this, but I don't know why. I remember hearing that Lore episode. This was years and years ago, so I didn't remember specifics.
It's if you listen to it now, because Aaron Mahnke, he's added something to the beginning of it to basically say like, look, this was my first ever episode. The tone of the podcast is
it was
really
his
different
first one
now.
ever?
Or well, it was the first episode of Lore. I don't know if it was the first podcast he ever did.
That's cool. I didn't know that, though. I didn't know that was episode 1. That's funny.
So he has a little message basically apologizing for it. But you listen to it, and it's still fucking incredible. Like, he's so talented. He's a great storyteller. So if you're looking for additional Mercy Brown content, highly recommend that episode. It's a quick listen. I think it's only like 15 minutes or something like that.
I remember his early episodes were very quick. I listened to him a lot. You know, he's coming to Milwaukee.
What?
And yes. Next month. Yeah.
Well,
I'd like to go.
That would be dope. Oh, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
I love his voice. I have one more piece of Lena's story to share, which I think is
okay.
a little spooky.
Yeah. I'm scared.
So Everett, her descendant, has some interesting stories about alleged hauntings and perhaps a ghost. Yeah. So
I've been waiting. We're only on episode 3, but I'm like, this is like why I wanted to do this podcast. I love a haunting.
Yeah.
I love a ghost.
I know, me too. I love a ghost.
We finally got one. Yes.
Yeah,
okay, cool.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a cool one. Okay. So the way that Everett's story goes is that one night when he was in his teens, I think he was like 15 or 16, he was driving around with his brother at night, like you do when you're a teenager.
As you do, yes.
Yeah. So they're driving around in his car, right? And they turn past the church and the cemetery, right? Okay. And they saw right near Lena's grave, basically it's like a big ball of fire, about the size of a football, like an American football.
Oh.
hovering off
Okay.
the ground at like a few feet off the ground, maybe like coffee table height. And apparently it was burning so hot that it was almost blue. And their first reaction was like, fuck this, we're out of here. Like, we're not fucking with that. Because they had grown up with their mom telling them, like, don't go near that rock, don't go near that grave, bad things happened there. And so they see this spooky thing and they get out of there.
Yeah.
And as you do, like, they're talking to other farmers about this or whatever. They're talking to one specific farmer, another person who lives in Exeter about it. And they don't really mention where they were or anything. They just said, you know, we saw this like ball of fire the other day and we didn't know what it was. And without prompting, the other farmer goes, you must have been near the Mercy Brown Cemetery.
What? Ooh, I
because
just got chills.
Apparently they are not the only ones to see it. And I wonder if they will not be the last. But yeah, going back to what I said earlier, don't go to the grave just to fuck with it. Be respectful.
Yeah.
Don't just be nice if you're going to go there. But yeah.
Wow. That's cool. I love when there's multiple counts of the same thing.
Yeah, me too.
But independently. Interesting.
It is interesting. It is. And I think it's interesting that it's a ball of fire.
Yeah.
I've not heard a similar ghost story or haunting story like that before.
Yeah, I've definitely balls of light.
But not
beyond just like the standard orb,
fire.
But like, but a straight up fireball.
Yeah.
Especially since her story doesn't have a lot to do with fire.
But I wonder if it's rage, you know?
Maybe.
Anger at being suspected to be a vampire and her body being exhumed and her heart being cut out, you know, I would kind of get that. But also, there are also reports that pranksters will like put things near the grave, like they'll put like a flashlight by there or something that sheds off or that gives off light as like a it's the ghost kind of thing. So if you do go there and you do see light, know that it might just be another human being a prick, but it could be Lena. Who knows?
Yeah.
And that's it. That's all I got.
That's cool.
That's the whole story.
Well, it's definitely a sad story. But I think it's one of those, like, we can learn a lot from it. Don't exhume people and don't blame them for being blood-sucking demons, because there's probably just a scientific reason why things are happening.
Yeah. For the most part, listen to doctors.
Yeah. Listen to credible doctors.
Yeah. Yeah. But also don't be afraid to disagree with them if they're not listening to what you say, particularly if you're a woman.
Yeah.
But that's a whole other soapbox that I can get on at a later date.
That's a whole other
fucking thing. We should do a flavor on like creepy medical practices that used to.
Oh, we will. I think I have it on my list that I haven't added yet. Friends, we have like 17,000 years worth of flavors we want to get through, so we'd love to hear what you want to hear about, but please know that we've got a lot in our back pockets.
And we are open to ideas to add even more to the list.
Yes. We will be here for a long time.
I'm never dying.
So
yeah, I don't know.
Thank you for joining in this. It's hard to end with these stories, but if you enjoyed yourself, come back, like and subscribe.
I've heard subscribing is really fun. I would love to subscribe, but I already have.
Oh, and rate and review.
And subscribe. Sorry. Okay, I'm done.
Rate and review.
Like,
hit us
rate,
with that 5-star.
All kinds of things.
All the stuff.
Yeah.
Till next time, little spoons. Keep it cool.
And keep it creepy.